Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Belmas Leadership Preparation and Development Research Interest Group event. We are very excited to be here. We are delighted really to bring part two of Global Perspectives on Leadership Preparation and Development. We had part one in February, which was very successful, so successful that we really felt that we needed to do a part two. There was a lot of interest and really is a wonderful opportunity to come together on such an important topic for everyone here. My name is Bernie Moreno. In case you don't know me, I am from the University of Melbourne. I'm a Belmas trustee and one of the co-conveners of this LPD RIG, together with Susan Salin and with Deb Outhwaite. Unfortunately, Deb can't be with us today, but she sends our best wishes to you all. We extend, of course, a special welcome to our participants. And I should have done this earlier, but there we go. Nice slide to start today. And as I was saying, it's a special opportunity for us to welcome our presenters today. We have four presenters: Dr. Ponzo Morosi, Professor Tony Bush, Dr. Niamh Hickey, and also Associate Professor Meng Tian. We're very fortunate also that our discussant is Professor Tony Bush from Nottingham University, Editor-in-Chief for Educational Management, Administration and Leadership, EMAL, and President of Belmas. So we are thrilled to have you all here, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Some practical matters to point out. So the session will be recorded and will conclude at the start of the Q&A. Each presenter will have about 15 minutes for their presentation, and when the first 10 minutes are up, we'll let you know that you've got 5 minutes to go. After presentations, we will move on to Professor Tony Bush as our discussant. And following that, we will end with Q&A. And so make sure that you're writing down the questions that you have, or feel free to add them to the chat during our session. We will end this presentation with some information on our next event, which is going to be at the conference. We're very excited about that, and also with some other little bits and pieces. So with that, I don't want to take any more time. I'd like to invite now our first presenter, Dr. Ponzo Morosi, who's going to talk to us on South Africa and she's from Warwick University. I'll stop sharing now. So is Ponzo here with us?
Yes, she's here, but we have to unmute her.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. Yes.
I do have some slides. I don't know if I'm allowed to share.
Absolutely, by all means.
Okay. I must say, I thought I was the last speaker, so I was a little bit more relaxed, and I didn't realize that I was the first one. So let me share my screen. Do you see my presentation now?
Not yet.
Okay. You see my email, right?
Yes.
You see a whole lot of things you're not supposed to see. and now you see it.
Oh, there we go. Yes.
Right.
If you'd like to put it on presentation mode,
yeah.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Are we good now?
That's on presenter mode. You might want to have it on, so that's on presenter mode rather than presentation mode. I don't know if that's something that you'd like to change.
Presenting in presentation mode.
It's if you don't want to change it, you can just leave it. You can just leave it like that. Maybe.
Okay. All right. Can I just leave it like this then?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Right. Hello everyone. I'm Ponso Morosi. I'm based at the University of Warwick. I thought I was hearing some reaction. And I'll be talking here about the South African context. And I always say I feel a little bit nervous talking about South Africa, knowing that there are many colleagues in the room who could have done the job better. But anyway, I hope that I'll give it my perspective. And I thought, and Benny, can you remind me how much time I have? 15 minutes? 15. Right, okay. And so I thought many colleagues in the room would probably know a little bit, if not more, about the South African context. And I thought to share some of the complexities around the whole issue or the whole notion or the whole field of school leadership preparation and development. And this is because for me, it's always complex, really. And and that complexity is always important because it defines how we, or it determines rather how we understand the field and how we take it going forward. So I'm going to present this complexity on 4 areas. And there's a whole lot of background I could give about the South African context for the sake of the colleagues in the room who may not know much about the South African context. But I'm hoping that some of the issues and the background will become clear as I speak. And if not, that some of them could be part of the questions, or some of them could be things that I could respond to even at a later stage. But I thought to structure my talk around these 4 complexity areas, which are the complexity around the unequal system inherited from the apartheid legacy, and then the then following complexity of the post-apartheid education policy landscape, and then the complexity of the research landscape, the research in the field, educational leadership and management more generally, and then the complexity of what in some literature is conceptualized as shifting discourses, which other literature perceives as changing discourses or conflating discourses of the concepts, the terms, leadership, management, principalship, so on and so forth. And so all of these are underpinned by the current complex situation in terms of the socioeconomic status. But I think some of those issues will come clearer as I speak. So in terms of the complexity of the unequal system inherited from the apartheid legacy, this is really, for me, the importance of this is really based on the understanding of where the country has come from. And I know that there's now going to be elections. Some of us who are based outside South Africa have already had the opportunity and the privilege to do that. But the country is going to be casting elections later this month or next week on the 30th, I think, year post independence. But that legacy of inequality lingers on. And that for me is really, really important because it is from understanding that complexity that most of the things that the country is experiencing, or most of the issues that the school leaders are experiencing come from. So understanding that that whole background. I'm not going to read the points on the slide. I'll just pick a few to speak on, because otherwise that would probably take a lot of time. So I think maybe if, as soon as the slide comes up, if colleagues would like to read and listen at the same time, that would really help. But one of the things that really drive me and drive my work, it's understanding that the whole context within which school leadership and management and school leadership preparation and development in particular is framed is based on that context of legacy. And here it's really important, for me, it's really important for colleagues to understand this, particularly when it comes to the inequality that was based on racial terms. And I know that most of the people know this, but this is the point that I always like to let it linger and sink, because I think sometimes we are very quick to judge that, the country is now going to be voting in its whatever year, 30 years of post-democracy. And so what has been the change, what has been doing? And by presenting my talk like this, I'm not exonerating the democratic government of its responsibilities in terms of what it should have and what it should have done and what it hasn't done. But I'm merely painting this picture because for me, understanding the context of preparation and development for school leaders is not as simple as it could be perceived sometimes. So, and the thing that is central, again, to that, that I would like to pick on from the slide is which emanates from the unequal model that was inherited from the past, is that about the unequal teacher preparation, which then influenced the unequal principalship preparation. And here, I think I may want to mention that the different universities and the different providers in the country since the apartheid times have always been offering different programs of preparing and developing school leaders in different capacities and through different programs. Many of these were initiated by individuals, but for some departments, as I indicated earlier, that there were 19 racially and ethnically determined departments. Some of them were governed or controlled or managed from the department. But when you have that system that was so unequal, it goes without saying that even the preparation of teachers in general, which is the pool where we draw school principals, even that pool had problems in terms of preparation. So I just want that background to linger on, and for colleagues to understand that that the significance of that history. Because if we ignore that history, for me, the danger is that we will always find excuses of blaming the system as it is, or maybe even maintaining it as it is without necessarily understanding the significance or the importance of where the system comes from. And the second complexity is around what was then the response of the post-apartheid government or the democratic government in terms of the policies of educational leadership or educational policies in general. And I pick on just a few areas, and some of these areas have been raised in the work of Pam Christie and a lot of other colleagues that I've listed on the slide. And those that I haven't listed, there's a whole work by colleagues like Raj Mestri, Kelly Grant, people who are still active in the field, and a whole range of other colleagues that I may not mention. But I think the complexity around these broad areas for me is brought about by, if you look at governance, for example, the governance of schools in South Africa is governed by what is called the South African Schools Act of 1996, within which different roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders are determined. And in particular, the role of what is called the school governing bodies. And it is within this expectation and role of school governing bodies that there lies some tension, a tension that I myself have not picked up in my work necessarily, but has been picked up by several colleagues, some of whom are on the call. But this tension pertains to the roles and responsibilities of school principals who are part of this governance. But maybe I may say that maybe perhaps lack of clarity in terms of the role demarcation and the expectation from the different constituencies and a whole range of other issues, including who's involved and who's expected to be involved. And then, so if colleagues are interested in reading more about that, there's a whole range of colleagues who have done work in detail around the tension that exists between school principals and school governance within that. And that also has implication for what I'll talk about in a minute, which is the whole notion of leadership and management and all the relevant concepts. And the other broader policy issues are around the Labour Relations Act or the Labour Relations policies and the tensions therein in terms of what then led to the militancy of the trade unions or the teacher unions in particular, which then affected or would affect the extent to which we understand and practice preparation and development, depending on how we understand leadership and development. And again, this may not be clear at the moment, but the point that I really am making about this is depending on how we understand some of these concepts, then our understanding could be either constrained within how we perceive and how we conceptualize these concepts, or our understanding can be broadened by that. And within that broad understanding then lies what we can then consider as preparation for school leadership or as development for school leadership. So that whole
Conso, sorry to interrupt. You've got 5 minutes. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's really helpful. I appreciate that. And then the last policy area being that of performance management. And I think there's a whole range of policy areas here. I think there are colleagues who have done a lot more work in these particular policies, but it's around the whole notion of evaluation and whole school evaluation and leading to the South African standards of school principalship. I think that's what is called, which then facilitated what it was known or is still known as the ACE School Leadership, which was a national program of a pilot really of a national preparation and development. Sorry that my thoughts are getting twisted around that. It's because I'm realizing that I had so much to say and I'm now already getting anxious of time. But it's within that I personally started getting involved, and the realization of how much of the legacy of what the country has been through, and which then demanded the complex influx of these policies, and the extent to which the tension then arose as a result of these policies and the other competing demands on the ground, which sometimes brought tensions in terms of the extent to which policies themselves are explicit in what is expected from the role of school principals, but also what they are not explicit about this. And a lot of them I think one would argue, or I would argue, that most of them lacked the explicit nature of what school preparation and development would look like. And then the next area of complexity is what I perceive the research landscape that has been dominated and influenced heavily by Western theorization. And this is where, because depending on what theories are in place, or depending on what research is in place and how we understand the situation in context, that some of the practices are then perceived or measured by these Western standards, which would then render what are the practices on the ground to be deficient, because they are viewed and judged by standards that are not necessarily compatible with the local and contextual realities. And so for me, what is really problematic is the talk that it accompanies most of the research on leadership or school preparation and development. And I'm not exonerating myself in that. I have been part of that talk, but the whole notion of underprepared school principals, how are we defining underprepared school principals? How are we defining dysfunctional schools? How are we defining ineffective leadership? And on what basis are we making those judgments about what's ineffective, what's dysfunctional, and what is underprepared? And the other thing that is important is the whole understanding of then this literature, the hierarchical notions of a leadership that puts priority on the person at the top, and that person at the top being the school principal, and that whole notion of hierarchy. Disregarding teaching, for example, as preparation for headship. And some of the work that I'm currently involved in with my colleague, Kelly Grant, who I think is in the call, is beginning to demonstrate how what teachers go through as part of the preparation for teaching works as part of preparation for the principalship. But when you look at the literature on preparation, on school leadership, preparation and development, the discourse would be the discourse of underpreparedness would be so much in the priority, and teachers as teachers as principals. Let me rephrase that. Teachers who get into headship or into principalship with no dedicated or designated training in educational leadership being regarded as not sufficiently prepared. And I accept that these are different roles, but I think some of the work we are doing is beginning to show how significant some of that teacher training and teaching experiences in general have played a significant role in terms of preparing teachers for the leadership.
Ponto, we're going to have to leave it there because we've got 3 other presentations. If we have time, can we come back to your slides? Would that be all right?
Okay.
Just so that we can continue the flow. It's super interesting. We just need to make sure that we've got time for all of the presentations.
Okay. No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I hate to do that, but we've just got to make sure that we've got enough time for everyone. Thank you.
You're doing your job.
Thank you for your presentation. Do remember to put your questions in. Tony, thank you very much for sharing and talking to us about the Malaysia situation in developing leaders.
Well, thank you very much, Bernie. And Suzanne, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to put my presentation on the screen. It's not working for me today for some reason. So I will just do that.
I will just get it. So I will certainly do that for you.
While Suzanne's being kind enough to do that, good afternoon or whatever time of day it is for you, everybody. And just a bit of background for me. When I first joined the University of Nottingham in 2013, for the next 7 years, I held a dual position working for the university in Nottingham and also at the university's campus in Malaysia. And I managed to get involved in quite a lot of research in Malaysia while working there with my colleagues. And it's some of that research that I'm going to be referring to today. A couple of other points that I think you might want to hear about before I start. There is an Asia School Leadership Roundtable being held in Bangkok next week, which I have the privilege of attending, and I think that will throw more light on issues of leadership preparation in Asia. So thank you very much, Suzanne. I appreciate your help as always. Could you go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm beginning then, colleagues, with the motivation for leadership preparation, and the policy reform agenda over the last 11, 12 years has been dominated by this policy document called the Malaysia Education Blueprint 2013 to 2025. So the 12 years are nearly up. And as I mentioned earlier, I began to work in Malaysia in 2013, and just as this blueprint was being launched, and I was able to work with some colleagues then on the implementation of that blueprint. The overwhelming motivation at the political and senior administrative level is to improve the country's PISA ranking. And of course, we know this is a major driver for political leaders and others in many countries. And I think Malaysian colleagues were basically embarrassed that Malaysia was ranking in the bottom quartile in all 3 subjects featured in PISA. I'm sure everybody knows that's languages, mathematics, and science. And so this Malaysia Education Blueprint had many different chapters, or what they called shifts. And leadership was the theme of Shift 5 and was seen as central to the reform agenda. Our leadership preparation there is driven by the specialist division of the Ministry, Institute Aminuddin Baki, IAB, which is a huge organization with very large numbers of staff and lots of different locations within what is a very large country geographically, Malaysia, with its 9 states. So in a way, you could see the IAB as being similar to the National College for School Leadership, which UK colleagues and others will remember was an important part of the education landscape between 2000 and 2013, when it was gradually closed by the government of the day. Incidentally, for those who like these little anecdotes, the National College for School Leadership building is on the same campus as the School of Education at the University of Nottingham. And I do go and have a cup of coffee there occasionally just to go back and think about what it used to be like when it was the National College for School Leadership. So the IAB is a very important organisation, very strongly connected to the Ministry of Education in what is a highly centralised education system. Among the very important qualifications it offers is the National Professional Qualification for Educational Leadership, which is now mandatory for aspiring principals. I think here we have an interesting situation, because one of the key questions in my own writing and thinking about leadership preparation is there a national qualification or not? And the answer is yes in some cases and no in others, where you would have a more distributed model or more pluralist model, as we will see, I think, in some of the presentations later today. So this National Professional Qualification for Educational Leadership used to be called the National Professional Qualification for Headship, and was modelled on the English National Professional Qualification for Headship. I think that gives us some indication of the motivation, and it raises key questions about, so if they want to improve the country's PISA ranking, how does leadership do that? And the blueprint has a lot of information around the research that connects leadership to student outcomes. And the very well-known work by Ken Leithwood and his colleagues is cited several times in the blueprint. Thank you, Susan. Can we move on to the next slide? So, selection. One of the interesting things for me in the leadership preparation, research and literature globally has been the relative neglect of principal selection as an area of research and comment. Now, of course, you may know different, those of you on the call, but my assessment is not enough attention has been given to this. And I think I've seen that my predecessor as email editor-in-chief, Peter Robbins, is on the call. Good afternoon, Peter. But I think it's something over 20 years since the last major study of principal selection in the UK, for example. So the interesting issue there is the promotion to principal has been tenure-based. So in other words, the more senior you are, the more likely you are to be promoted to the position of principal. And they have mandatory retirement there at the age of 60. And often principals are appointed when they're 55 plus. So Josephine Chai, she was my PhD student in Malaysia, did an important study. And one of the things she looked at was the relationship between tenure-based appointments and student outcomes. She was able to show through a comparative study of 2 different schools serving a similar socioeconomic base, that where principles change rapidly, there are poorer student outcomes. And in a way, you'd think that finding is unsurprising. So what the Malaysia Education Blueprint now intends to do is to adopt professional criteria for principal selection, including a requirement for applicants to have the NPQEL that I mentioned earlier. And then another issue that I may want to pick up on as discussant later is, what do we know about the impact of professional qualifications in terms of, for example, student outcomes? It's too early to give an answer in relation to Malaysia, but I think it's a question of some importance for those of us in this RIG. Thank you, Suzanne. Would you please go on? So one of the fascinating aspects of Shift 5 of the Malaysia Education Blueprint is its strong normative tone. In a way, we shouldn't be surprised, should we? But governments have normative tones, and if I say something that you might want to challenge later, governments usually think they know the answers. And then this normative leadership model here is one example. So the blueprint stresses that school leadership should become distributed. And quotation there, I think the ministry will move towards a model of distributed leadership where effective, high-quality school leadership permeates the entire organisation. If only it was that simple, colleagues. If only it was that simple. What's interesting here is the notion of this distributed leadership being allocated. So I was able to do a project with my colleague Ashley Owen, who I've actually spoken to this morning, to show one of the things we found from that research was that the distributed leadership is allocated by the principal to people holding official leadership roles. This connects to the notion of allocative distribution, which, for example, was picked up by Richard Bolden and his colleagues in a paper published in Email some years ago. And this, of course, is very different from the westernized theory that Ponce was referring to earlier, which assumes that distribution is somehow emergent. So that's an interesting challenge, and it's a challenge for us as scholars, I think, to how can we develop distributed leadership in a way that works for centralized systems like Malaysia. The other interesting part of that research, or another interesting part of that research, was that all the other leaders deferred to their principals. But when we tried to establish what it was the senior and middle leaders were able to do through distribution leadership, they were constantly checking back with their principals to make sure they were doing it right. About one defines right. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Move on, please. So the next key part really of the normative model that the ministry was introducing then is instructional leadership. And really, I think since Viviane Robinson's important study in variously reported from 2007 to 2009, we as people interested in school leadership have a greater sense of the importance of instructional leadership because her research findings were quite compelling in showing that instructional leadership has more impact on student outcomes than the other models that we're all familiar with, including transformational leadership. So the blueprints picked up on this very strongly. And here they're talking about, so, okay, we want principals to be instructional leaders. Historically, they have been administrative leaders, what we might sometimes call managerial leaders, focusing on the accountability processes within a strongly hierarchical context and not engaging very directly with teaching and learning. But this blueprint I mentioned earlier, instructional activities that directly raise the quality of teaching and learning, such as lesson observations and curriculum planning, have more impact on student outcomes than administrative activities. So I think we would all say on the call, so what, we know that already. But it's quite interesting in the Malaysian context, where principals have been perceived to be very much part of the hierarchy and engaged mainly in administrative activities. So how does this play out in terms of leadership preparation? So the National Professional Qualification for Educational Leadership has instructional leadership as a central part of the programme. So aspiring principals all become familiar with instructional leadership through this program. And just one point I haven't put on the slide, but worth thinking about, is the research that we've done there in Malaysia shows that the participants in the program are highly critical of the instructional leadership and other parts of the program being highly theoretical, not related to their practice, and delivered by people who've never been school principals. Now, we might want to think about, well, okay, does that matter? Is that a problem, or is it not a problem? So something to think about later. And what we found in our research on instructional leadership, this was a separate project funded by the Head Foundation, which was mainly about policy implementation. Oh, you've gone too, oh, thank you. You've gone too far. It was mainly about policy implementation. And one of the things we looked at in particular was instructional leadership. And what they most principals implemented the classroom observation program. It was mandated for them to do so. But people didn't understand the rationale for it. One of the things I should have said earlier is this Malaysia Education Blueprint, almost all the principals we interviewed for this research knew about the Malaysia Education Blueprint, but had not read it. And a comment that we made in our report was, if people have not become aware of something, they're highly unlikely to implement it effectively. Thank you, Suzanne. So this is my final slide, really. So another aspect of this leadership shift in the Education Blueprint was this very ambitious statement here to ensure high-performing school leaders in every school, which they define as capable of improving the school's performance. So one of my comments at the time, and I was fortunate really to have engagement with a lot of very senior ministry officials there, is to say, if you succeed in doing this, you'll be the first country in the world to do it. Right? So you need to understand the nature of the ambition you're talking about here, particularly from what was a low base. So one of the people involved in our research and reported in a paper published, I mentioned my colleague Ashley on earlier, this was a paper published in email. So a former deputy minister interviewed by Ashley stressed the importance of instructional leadership for high performance, not administrative stuff. But what was interesting about it, her tone was normative. She didn't claim this was widely enacted. And the evidence of our subsequent research is it's not been widely. So just to round up on the motivation then, the PISA results 13 years on from the first ones that were analysed show very little change in their position in the PISA rankings. There are more countries involved now. Malaysia has just moved into the third quartile from the bottom quartile. But for that's 9 years after the introduction of the blueprint, and one can only assume that the political leaders and others are very disappointed about the very modest change to the position of Malaysia in those rankings. Whatever we think about the rankings, I guess that's a separate debate. And my question, I think, to you all and to myself, see, what do we learn from all this about the impact of leadership preparation on student outcomes? So they have a mandatory qualification, they have a specialist, well-funded, well-staffed leadership centre, and yet 9 years on, it's made little difference. And one of the issues that I've been critical of in Malaysia is, in comparison to their southern neighbours in Singapore, is they won't challenge poor performance. So it doesn't matter how bad a teacher you are, you will still have your job for life. Ditto for principals, doesn't matter how bad you are. And I was a bit controversial when I said that any system that won't remove bad teachers or principals is not serious about school improvement. I'll leave that perhaps controversial point for you to think about, and that's the end of my presentation. And thank you very much for helping, Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Tony. We move on to Neve Hickey. Thank you, Neve.
Thanks a million, Bernie. I'll just share my screen here now. And thank you very much to Bernie and Suzanne and Deb, of course, for the invite to engage in this presentation as well. I thoroughly enjoyed the first, I suppose I could call it a series now, with two of these global perspectives on leadership preparation and development. And from the first two presentations, it's definitely living up to the expectations of the first. So I hope I can continue that. In terms of what I would like to chat about really is just give an overview of what's happening in the Irish context. I suppose I'll set the scene, look at some of the challenges, and then quite broadly speaking, what are some areas in which we're working in leadership preparation development currently in Ireland as well. And to echo what Ponsu said earlier as well, I can see some of my colleagues from Ireland are in attendance as well. And I know many of you are very engaged in this work that I'm talking about. So I hope I do it justice. I was looking to start the presentation with a photo from Ireland, and I realized I was flicking through these really gorgeous photos on Google Images looking for something, and I said, you know what, I'll just go, and I looked and got 3 photos from the last month of my camera roll. So I presented 3 photos here. I saw Trelog is here in attendance, and the photo on the left to be very familiar to you, Trelog. We're from the same town. And I suppose really why I wanted to share this with you is in terms of setting the scene for the following slide, which will look at the breakdown of schools and the number of schools in Ireland. So while of course we have, you know, cities and lots of built up areas, and there's lots of parts of the country that are quite rural. So there's about 5 million in our population in Ireland at the moment, and I think about 1.3 million are in Dublin alone. So in terms of looking at the landscape, sorry, I'm just trying to move some now. In terms of looking at the landscape, when we look at the primary school sector particularly, there's a large number of schools. So there's over 3,000 primary schools in the country, which is quite a lot considering the population that we have in Ireland. And many of these schools, you can see in the second bullet point there on the left, are small schools where there might be 4 or less mainstream teachers and within that school. So there's almost 42% of the primary schools are these small schools, but there's only 13.4% of pupils around the country enrolled in them. So that's quite a unique setup, I suppose. And then looking at the post-primary schools, there's over 700 post-primary schools, so much less than the primary schools. And there are 3 types then. So there's the voluntary secondary schools, which are privately owned, many of which owned by the church. Vocational schools are ETB schools, which are governed by the Education Teaching Training Board. And then the community and comprehensive schools as well, which are like the voluntary secondary schools traditionally focused on the academic subjects in inverted commas, and then the vocational schools, again, it was more the hands-on types of subjects, and the community and comprehensive schools, a lot of them came from an amalgamation of voluntary secondary schools and vocational schools to provide a comprehensive set of the subjects available to pupils within that community. But of course, most schools now have a comprehensive amount of subjects available. Why I wanted to showcase this, I think it's important, particularly in the primary school setting, like in those small schools when there's 4 mainstream class teachers or fewer, a lot of these school leaders are going to be teaching school leaders as well. So they're going to be people that are working in the classroom and also leading schools. So I think it's important for the context. If I could just move my slide on now. Looking at the structure of school leadership then, I suppose the principal, which you'll all be quite familiar with in terms of a principal teacher or a head teacher, the full word that we use like that is principal teacher. And the reason behind that is there's a strong emphasis in the Irish context in terms of the principal leading teaching and learning. And I know it's similar in some contexts, but not all of them. So that's another point to emphasize. And then there's the deputy principal. So in each school, there's going to be 1 deputy principal, and in larger secondary schools, there can be up to 3 deputy principals. There's then assistant principals, which are like our middle layer of leadership. So there's assistant principal 1s and assistant principal 2s. And these have specific roles of responsibility. So they were special duties, and all of the emphasis was kind of on the role that they were assigned. But now, as we're moving more towards that distributed form of leadership, which has been discussed in the previous presentations, the idea is that we're talking about these middle leaders being assistants to the principal. So they're part of that leadership team. It's not just one specific role that they're leading out in. There's been a change recently as well in terms of assistant principals. used to get their post based on seniority. So if you were the next in line for the role, you would likely get that middle leadership role, whereas now they're based on competency-based interviews, which is quite a change, a cultural change in terms of that shared leadership piece. And then, of course, teachers as well. So sometimes that distributed model is kind of talked about going hand in hand with that middle leadership piece. But of course, there's also a large amount around this idea of teacher leaders as well. And that comes through in policy as well, that all teachers are leaders in terms of learning. But I suppose in my own research, I do have a question around what do we really mean by teacher leadership? Is it within the classroom or is it outside of that as well? The policy landscape then, so for primary and post-primary again, I've presented just two documents. They're looking at our school document, which is a quality framework. There's one for primary schools and post-primary schools, and that really lays out what effective practice looks like in terms of learning and teaching and school leadership and management. And then there's two circulars that focus specifically on leadership and management, one for primary schools and one for post-primary schools. So these would be the main documents, I suppose, the policy documents and government documentation that we would look at in terms of this whole idea of leadership preparation and development. So this looking at our schools document is a framework that gives a shared understanding of what effective and highly effective practice looks like in terms of learning and teaching and leadership and management. They're the two areas that we look at. So if I just quickly, just to give you kind of an idea of what this document looks like, in the learning and teaching section, there's 4 domains: the learner outcomes, learner experiences, teachers' individual practice, and teachers' collective and collaborative practice. The same then for the leadership and management section of the framework. So there's leading, learning and teaching, managing the organization, leading school development, and developing leadership capacity. So then for each of these areas, if I was to kind of zoom into that last piece there of developing leadership capacity, each of those statements are followed by statements of effective practice, which is this middle column, and then highly effective practice, which is the right-hand column. And these are the types of statement that inform a lot of the school self-evaluation and inform a lot of the practices that we engage in schools. So I showed this one. I suppose these statements here are of particular interest to me in terms of my research in distributed leadership. If you were to look at the second one, the statement of effective practice is that the principal encourages teachers to take on leadership roles and to lead learning and is willing to distribute significant leadership responsibilities. So again, you see it's the teachers that are mentioned here, so that the idea is it's shared across middle leaders, but also classroom teachers as well. And then this statement of highly effective practice moves this into this space of the principal empowering the teachers to take on leadership roles and lead learning, and then through the effective use of distributed leadership models. So I shared these last few slides with you kind of for 2 reasons, really. I wanted to give you an insight into what does this overall framework that we put such an emphasis on in Irish schooling look like, and then also to showcase that piece around that movement towards more distributed models of leadership that's happening in the Irish context at the moment. Looking then at some of the current challenges around school leadership. So some of these are going to be, you know, similar in different contexts as well. One of them being the teacher shortages and the emphasis on the challenge around that there's placed at the moment on this area. I suppose the teacher shortages, of course, is for lots of different reasons in terms of people, you know, getting into teacher education degrees and going into different professions, maybe leaving the country and teaching abroad, for example. But one of the most significant pieces around this as well is that idea around, of course, the cost of living. And then depending on where in the country this is, it's going to be much more significant. Like there's a significant shortage in Dublin at the moment, particularly because of that piece around the cost of living there as well. So it's a significant challenge for school leadership at the moment in terms of getting teachers in schools. There is a hesitancy to apply for school leadership roles, and the reference I picked for this, you know, is that little bit older, and I did that kind of intentionally because I suppose I wanted to highlight in one way this isn't necessarily a very new thing to the Irish context. Of course, lots of things have happened since 2006 when the Irish Primary Principals Network was talking about the hesitancy to apply for school leadership, particularly in terms of leadership preparation and development. There's been huge growth. But there has been this hesitancy to apply for a while, and I suppose the motivations or the reasons behind this can have changed as time has gone on. I mean, you know, as we have lots of us seen in different contexts in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact that has had on people wanting to apply for the roles of senior leaders, it has had a significant impact as well. So the next two bullet points feed into, I suppose, maybe some potential reasons for that hesitancy to apply as well. So that's based around stress and burnout. So there was a well-being survey conducted recently for senior school leaders. So this is principals and deputy principals. And at the secondary school level, there was 44% of participants said that they were experiencing significant burnout. So, I mean, the statistics there were quite stark. In my own research then, in the next bullet point, I've identified some challenges to the sustainability of school leadership. And it was interesting because this study was exploring distributed leadership and lived experiences of distributed leadership. But this idea around sustainability and the challenges to it just came up so clearly, and that is what I focused on for the purpose of the end of my doctorate. And the challenges that were identified were things like the administrative overload, so all of the paperwork that's being expected on school leaders, the policy proliferation, the significant increase in the number of policy documents that school leaders are expected to engage with, and also the increasing complexity and breadth of the role of senior leaders as well. So there's some of the challenges there. Also this idea to link in with the previous presentations about the movement to distributed leadership practices. As I said, this is something that we are doing in Ireland, or we're working towards, but of course it's not without its challenges. Like there is this piece, and it came through in this paper here by O'Sullivan and McGrourk, about distributed leadership as just delegation, which Tony, you were mentioning in your presentation as well, questions around how do we do this in an impactful way. And in that paper about the challenges to the sustainability of the role, distributed leadership was suggested as a way in which to support in sustainability. But again, it's kind of that piece around how do we do this in a way that doesn't just add to the already busy workload and move that kind of stress and burnout that we're talking about to elsewhere, or spread it out, you know, that it is that true distribution. So there's some challenges, I think, around that movement to genuine distributed leadership practices as well. This is, I love this visual here, and I see my colleague Anna May is here with us in the call as well. So Anna May will be much more familiar with this than I am, because this is a visual about learning to be a school leader in Ireland that was developed by the Centre for School Leadership. And the Centre for School Leadership are now known as IDA Leadership in Ireland. But it goes through what does it mean to learn to be a school leader within the Irish context. So I thought what better a visual to present in terms of this idea of leadership preparation and development. And if we're to start with the centre and kind of move outwards, that yellow circle in the very middle of the diagram is like the purpose of this learning to be a school leader. What is the real purpose and the real meaning behind this idea? And it's improving learning outcomes and well-being for students and school communities. And I think that's a very important thing that we keep in mind in terms of the work that we do in this area. The purple kind of semicircle pieces then is this idea that when we're engaging in leadership preparation and development, or learning to be a school leader, the impact is on both the person as a leader and also on the practice of the leader as well. So it's twofold. That kind of inner circle there with professional standards, reflection on practice, and so on. These are some areas that were identified in the research and in the literature in terms of being important in this idea of learning to be a school leader as well. And then that outside circle looks at who are we talking about in terms of leaders in Ireland. And it's this continuum of teacher leaders, middle leaders, aspiring senior leaders, new senior leaders, established senior leaders, and system leaders as well. And going back to that idea of the movement towards distributed leadership, this was designed intentionally in that cyclical way so that it's not that kind of hierarchy that we often see. In terms of kind of some programs and specifics of what's being offered in leadership preparation and development, I suppose it's first of all important to note in terms of preparation that there's no formal qualification required to be a school leader in Ireland at the moment. Having said that, then there's lots of availability in terms of postgraduate diplomas and masters in school leadership, that of course it's becoming more common that people might have completed that before applying for posts, but it's not a formal requirement. In terms of leadership development, what I wanted to highlight here is some of the incredible work that's being done by the support services and that team in IDA that Anna May is involved in, that's joined us here today. There is some fabulous work being done here. There's some of these words mightn't look very familiar because a lot of them are As Gaeilge or in the Irish language. But if I was to go through them quite quickly, Mishnuk means courage. And this is a program that's being offered to newly appointed senior leaders in the country. Taoiseach then is like the second, so I think the second to the Prime Minister, kind of our Prime Minister is the Taoiseach, and then the Taoiseach is the second to them. So in this case, it's for deputies. So it's a programme for deputy principals, newly appointed deputy principals. That's about a year long. Core then is for middle leaders. So it's this idea of like kind of cooperation or collaboration is kind of the translation of core, and it's for our middle leaders. And then Ferbert is this idea of development or growth, and that's for leadership teams. IJA also offer fabulous supports in terms of mentoring and coaching for principals. So there's mentoring available to all newly appointed school leaders from more experienced leaders. And there's also coaching available for senior leaders that they can engage in on a one-to-one basis, and then also with their team. So there's some incredible work being done there. And also there's lots of opportunities for continuous professional development from both IJA, but also the National Association, so the National Association of Principals and Deputies, who represent the post-primary colleagues, and then the IPPN, which is the Irish Primary Principals Network, which represents the primary school leader colleagues as well. So there's some fabulous work being done there. In terms of what and this is my last slide then, I suppose in terms of like what we're doing at the university level at UL, for example, there's the postgraduate diploma in school leadership, and this is jointly awarded by ourselves in the University of Limerick, the University of Galway and University College Dublin, and this is part funded by the Department of Education and IJA, who I've been talking a lot about. We have a Masters of Education in School Leadership, which is a one-year program that if you've done the postgraduate diploma in school leadership or something similar, you can do a year program to add on to that and have a master's. And then there's also an international master's in educational leadership, who Nikki, I see my colleague here as well, has joined us, who runs this program at UL. And then there's two kind of newer pieces that we're doing in terms of microcreds for experienced school leaders. And this has been in collaboration with the National Association of Principals and Deputies. It's part funded by them and delivered by us in UL, and to engage in some more professional development for existing and experienced school leaders. And then we have a new PhD in educational leadership, specifically tailored for people working full-time in education as well, and that's starting in September. So why I wanted to just finish up with this slide really was just to show you, I think, you know, there's lots of challenges in this area, and there's lots of things that we do need to continue to work on for sure. But what does give me, you know, enthusiasm and gets me excited about this is you can see that there's lots of different collaborations and work that's happening with different bodies coming together and heads coming together to think about, right, how can we continue to meet the needs of school leaders in terms of leadership preparation and development. And then to just return to this slide, always with that center circle in mind in terms of what is the purpose for all of this, and improving learning outcomes and well-being for our students and our school communities. So thank you very much. That's me.
Thank you very much, Niamh. Very interesting indeed. Thank you. Now we move on to our last presenter before we go into our discussant, Associate Professor Meng Tian from Birmingham University, who's going to talk to us about the leadership preparation and development that's happening in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Meng.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Suzanne, for helping me with the slides. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Suzanne, Bernie, and Deb for organizing this BELMA's RIG webinar, and greetings to everyone from rainy Birmingham. My name is Meng Tian. I'm Associate Professor in Educational Leadership at the University of Birmingham, and I also serve as the Director of Global Engagement for the College of Social Science here. So part of my responsibility is to establish and strengthen international partnership to ensure the university meets its global mission. So the MENA region in general and the UAE in particular is one of the university's strategic regions. And I will show you in a minute what we have established in the UAE. And before I dive into the content, I must say that I am still learning about the UAE education system and how leadership preparation and development are tailored to suit this particular context. So I'm by no means an expert, but a learner and a researcher who has some connections in the UAE to gain some insights into this fascinating country. Next slide, please. Very briefly, the UAE consists of 7 emirates, and the 3 largest emirates are Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Sharjah, where the federal government and the financial and business center are located. Many expats work in these 3 large emirates. So to serve their children's educational needs and to diversify the education provision in the country, international schools have been established over the past decades. And there are also 4 smaller emirates located in the northeastern part of the UAE. Islam is the official religion and Arabic is the official language. However, both Arabic and English are used in everyday life, including all the road and traffic signs and advertisements, etc. So due to the large number of expats, there are many other different languages spoken in the country, including Chinese, French, Hindi, Urdu, Turkish, etc. The overall population is between 9 and 10 million, and there are a few key demographic features worth highlighting here. So first, there's a significant gender imbalance in the UAE, with about 31% being female and 69% male. And second, there's a substantial imbalance between the local Emirati and expats. So only 12% being Emirati, so local nationals, and 88% being expats. And third, there's a considerable urban and rural divide, with 88% living in urban centers and only 12% in rural areas. And lastly, the median age of the population in the UAE is 33.6 years old, suggesting this is a very young and vibrant country. So all this background information helps us to understand the education system there. Next slide, please. So the reason we got involved in educational leadership preparation and development in the UAE is that the University of Birmingham opened a new campus in Dubai in 2022. It is the first global top 100 and UK Russell Group university to establish a campus in Dubai. And this move is part of the university internationalization strategy. And many prestigious universities use this strategy. As Professor Tony Bush just mentioned, Nottingham has campuses in Ningbo, China, and in Malaysia. And we know New York University has campuses in Shanghai and also in Abu Dhabi. So Birmingham, we have a campus in Dubai. Next slide, please. When the Dubai campus was established, its main purpose was to provide a variety of educational programs. So our college, the College of Social Science, has the strongest presence at our Dubai campus in terms of the staff and the student numbers. We offer many undergraduate and postgraduate programs, especially in business and in education. Then we also have other colleges offer degree programs in subjects like computer science, engineering, and psychology. So for the future, we aim to develop our Dubai campus into a hub for both research and teaching excellence, which means we're not only delivering education programs, but also actively lead research projects and host high-profile research conferences at our Dubai campus. So here you can see a photo of our Action Research Network consisting of school leaders and teacher leaders in the UAE. They participate in our annual Action Research Conference. So with the most annual Action Research Conference took place 2 days ago, the past weekend. Next slide, please. In terms of leadership preparation and development, the University of Birmingham Dubai offers the teacher training PGCE primary and secondary programs with international qualified teacher status, IQTS. So IQTS is a teaching qualification issued by the UK government and recognized by the UAE government. We also have a 2-year part-time MA education program with educational leadership as one special pathway. The Action Research Network, as mentioned earlier, is a community of practice. The University of Birmingham Dubai supports schools in the region to conduct action research, that feeds into their school improvement work. Then the university offers regular workshops and seminars to facilitate knowledge exchange and co-creation. Many research leads from these schools are pursuing MA degrees with us. So once a year, the university hosts the Action Research Conference for participants to present their school-based projects, key findings, and best practices. You can see some photos from last year's conference. This conference showcases how the university contributes to the leadership capacity building in the region. Next slide, please. And Birmingham is not the only university that offers educational leadership program. A quick search shows there are at least 5 universities offering either full-time or part-time educational leadership MA programs in the UAE, and the number is likely to increase as more education providers see the opportunity and a need for this type of leadership development in the UAE, for the reasons I'm going to cover in the second part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So currently, Birmingham Dubai is contributing to the leadership preparation and development by establishing a pathway for prospective educators. So these pathways allows educators to enter initial teacher education programs, progress to leadership programs, join the Action Research Network, and if they're willing, they can also conduct PhD studies in education with us. We take advantage of our 2 campuses. So one of my tasks for the next academic year is to facilitate the bilateral student mobility between our 2 campuses. So this includes sending UK school leaders to Dubai to shadow leadership work in schools and vice versa. Next slide, please. Briefly, if you're interested in the modules we teach and the teaching format for a 2-year part-time program, you can see it on this list. And for the second part of this presentation, I would like to discuss what makes the UAE a fascinating context for teaching and researching educational leadership. Next slide, please. I would say a big thank you to my PhD student, Kauso Amin Alay. In fact, Kauso is more like a colleague than a student, as he brings a lot of experience as a very seasoned school principal currently leading a large international school in Dubai. He generously shared his chapter from a book with me, providing valuable insights into the UAE education landscape. I incorporated some of the findings from his book chapter and supplemented with additional data and Kauso's expert views collected recently. Next slide, please. So one feature of the UAE education system is that it is stratified based on population cohorts. Among all UAE inhabitants, Emiratis receive free education and healthcare from the government, so they form a special population cohort. The Muslim religion serves as a significant identifier as well. So with all Muslims, either from the UAE or other countries, they are required to study Arabic and Islamic studies as mandatory subjects in both public and private schools. The shared religion, language, and lifestyle foster a very strong bond among the Muslim population and also bring Muslim expats closer to the local Emirati communities. Then for the non-Muslim expats, they can be roughly divided into 2 main groups. The first group is from South Asia, particularly from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And the second large group comprises expats from English-speaking countries. They also tend to hold professional and senior managerial roles at work. So their children normally studying at fee-paying international schools. You can find distinct international schools providing country-specific curricula tailored to each population cohort. Next slide, please. So in the two largest Emirates, Abu Dhabi and Dubai, the overall trend is there's an increasing number of private schools and a decreasing number of public schools. Public schools use Arabic as the language of instruction and follow the UAE Ministry of Education curriculum. About 80% of the students in public schools are UAE nationals. In Abu Dhabi, there's another type of public schools called charter schools. So very similar to the American charter schools. These schools are based on a partnership between the public and private sectors. They serve the same population as the Arabic-speaking public schools, but they teach an American curriculum. Then the private schools, they are normally fee-paying, offer a variety of curricula. So I counted in Abu Dhabi, you can find 14 different curricula. So they are American, Bangladesh, British, Canadian, French, German, IB, Indian, Japanese, Pakistani, Filipino, Sabis, which is originally from Lebanon, Spanish, and the UAE national curriculum. Altogether 14 in Abu Dhabi. So meanwhile, in Dubai, there are 14 curricula taught in international schools. In addition to the 14 mentioned earlier, they also have Iranian, Chinese, and Russian curricula. So some private schools cater to the expat communities, are supported by embassies. So these schools are non-profit. But most of the private schools, they charge premium fees, and they are profit-driven. More than 2/3 of all children are enrolled in the private sector, making UAE one of the most privatized countries in terms of education provision. Next slide, please. Public schools, they segregate male and female students at all levels, except in kindergarten and in recent years from grades 1 to 4. But for private schools, they have mixed gender classes. It's interesting to note that in the girls' public schools, the vast majority of the female teachers are Emirati. But in boys' schools, only a bit above 10% of male teachers are Emirati. So this difference may explain why girls tend to outperform boys in public schools, because they have female Emirati teachers as role models. The large number of international schools demand a significant number of teachers. So it's interesting to note here that the UAE government recognizes international teacher licenses from the countries such as the UK, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia and the US. You can see there's a clear preference by the UAE government for native English-speaking teachers from global North countries. Next slide, please. As to external accountability, schools are inspected on a regular basis. In my recent study on Ofsted inspection framework and practices, I interviewed some inspectors who worked in both English and UAE context. And it's very interesting. Most of them tend to favor the UAE inspection framework for a few reasons. You can see here they use a 6-point rating system instead of the 4.1 we're using in England, which gives a more nuanced picture of school performance. And second, the UAE framework has a stronger emphasis on supporting students with special needs and disabilities. Schools are required to provide learning support assistance and a strategic inclusion education plan. And third, moral education is also part of the school curricula in the UAE. They teach character and morality, individual and community, cultural and civic studies. Next slide, please. You can see the list of inspection materials submitted by public and private schools. And it's worth noting that for private schools, their data, student test data, are also scrutinized. one interesting comment from COSO is that the higher the tuition fees, the better the inspection results schools tend to receive. So this is a quite interesting phenomenon, showing how the neoliberal market ideology is underpinning the education system in the UAE. Next slide, please. I will not go into detail on this, but it's worth having a look at when it comes to inspection on leadership, what kind of things they are looking at in the UAE and how it can be compared to the Ofsted framework we are using in England. Next slide, please. So lastly, I would like to underline and invite your thoughts on the following leadership challenges. So first, in the UAE, inclusivity is defined and assessed in a very particular way. So for example, girls tend to outperform boys academically. So gender equality doesn't seem to be a very kind of strong barrier at the moment. And students with special educational needs and disabilities are also provided additional resources and support in large Emirates. But despite the large number of curricula offered, you can see English language and Arabic culture appear to be the most dominant thing in the education system. And in addition, there's still a large gap between educational performance and resources between the urban and rural areas. The second challenge is the UAE will need up to 30,000 more teachers by 2030. Both private and public schools are looking to recruit qualified teachers from the UK and other countries to meet this teacher shortage. High salaries can, of course, attract many expat teachers, especially from English-speaking countries. But at the same time, there's a need for more male Emirati teachers in schools. The schools are stratified not only by curriculum, student cohort, and language, but also by fees. The resource-rich premium schools tend to perform far better than budget schools, and they have different level of resources for CPD, etc. Most teachers and leaders are on short-term contracts, which means the staff turnover can be very high. And in general, the education system is like a quasi-market. So thirdly, regarding education transition and progress, most international schools are K-12, meaning students can progress within one system. But it's very difficult for them to switch to a completely different system using a completely different curriculum. And most expat children, they return to their home countries for higher education. Most UAE nationals who attend public schools also go to the UAE public universities because they use Arabic language. International universities, they have satellite campuses in the UAE, like our campus in Dubai. They also offer good options for students. Fourthly, most private schools use UK or US curricula, and the UAE recognize teacher qualifications from English-speaking countries. It seems that curriculum decolonization is not a top priority for the country and the government. Both the UAE government and the education market, they favor curricula and educators from powerful global north countries. So lastly, regarding the homeschool community collaboration, the UAE is the most progressive country in the MENA region for child protection. They have laws on child protection, but due to the privacy laws, rarely teachers have home visits. So in most cases, parents are invited to schools. Sometimes the child welfare concerns are a bit difficult to monitor because parents can change schools to evade certain intervention. Last slide, please. So that's all from me today. Hope I managed the time, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Meng. Very interesting presentation as well. So that concludes our 4 presentations, and now we move on to our discussant for tonight, Tony Bush. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Bernie, and thank you to the other presenters for their interesting presentations and which I also noticed were quite different in their orientation and their approach, which may provide an interesting opportunity for comparative discussion. So I've got a series of questions that I want to pose really to everybody on the call, but particularly to the presenters. And the first one I've got is to ask the question, so who is the provider? When we talk about leadership preparation and development, and hypothetically, one can think of 4 possible ones. That leadership preparation is directed by the government, the state, or there is a state-related agency, or there's an NGO lead, or there's a university lead. And I think we've seen evidence of some, if not all of those possible models on the call. So I'm going to begin by asking Ponso to address that who provides question. I hope she's still there. She's hiding. Ponso, we can't see you.
I'm here.
We can
I'm
now.
here. I'm here.
Let me throw that question at you. Who is the provider in the South African context?
I think before I answer that, can I say something that it is precisely that question, not that question. I didn't know you were going to ask that question, Tony, but what I'm expected to give as a response to that I'm problematizing in my talk, and that is we think about preparation and development in terms of training, and that's what gets us thinking about who the provider is. So my point was that we need to think about preparation and development in a much broader and more lateral way than just limiting it to training. That's what I was making, the point I was trying to make through that presentation that I couldn't finish. But to answer your question more directly, I think in the South African context, there are colleagues in the room who can say give another response if I don't get this right. But the provider has always been the universities, the different universities in the South African context. And even with what you and I, Tony, worked on many years ago now, which was evaluating what was being piloted as a national program, even then the provider was still the universities, but under the framework of the national government. Needless to say that that did not roll out in the way that it was perhaps intended at the time, but that did not take away the main provider as the different universities. So that's that. But I think there are other individual providers or private ones, if I may say, like the NGOs, like the project that Kelly Grant and I did, where she focused in the Eastern Cape, was the provider there was a private provider, I think. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a private sector provider. So you have those glimpses of private institutions or private organizations providing the leadership, but predominantly the provider is the universities.
Yes, thank you, Ponso. And I think what you're saying there really is that there are examples of the state and the universities collaborating in relation to that particular program. So not necessarily a straightforward answer. Thank you. Niam, I do hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And please correct me if I'm not.
Close enough. I've come to respond to anything that begins broadly with an N sound, I think.
That's very kind of you. So we've got some insights from your presentation. Thank you very much. So who then is the provider? Try and answer that question for us in relation to Ireland.
Yeah, it's I think in terms of that collaborative piece that you just mentioned, kind of in relation to Ponso's response to the question, I think that's what I tried to really get across in terms of my presentation, that there's lots of bodies coming together in terms of working in this area, and I think that's a real strength in the Irish context. And I suppose in terms of doing the frustrating thing of asking another question to a question to add onto it, I think it probably comes back to what exactly are we interpreting as leadership when we're looking at leadership preparation and development as well. In terms of the complexities around, distributed models of leadership or shared models of leadership, that, we're at least moving towards in our context. Teacher leadership is part of that then. So while, you know, there's the programs offered, you know, by the universities and different support services and different representative bodies, it's about thinking of, if we're looking at leadership more broadly as well, and we need to ensure we're looking at leadership preparation and development that bit more broadly as well. So I suppose just to add another kind of layer onto it, I think it's what do we mean by leadership when we're talking about how to prepare and develop leaders.
Well, thank you very much, Niam. And Meng, it seems from your presentation that the providers are mainly universities. Is that right? Would you like to elaborate on that for us, please?
And in the UAE, yes, universities do play a strong role in providing educational leadership programs. But at the same time, because of the large number of private schools in the UAE, they can attract very highly qualified school principals into these roles as well. So there's a strong buy-in kind of element in the system as well. I was just reading what is written here. So ADEK, which is the Education Administration Agency in Abu Dhabi, they require principals to hold a master or a doctorate degree, have at least 5 years school leadership experience, and be a native speaker of English, and holding citizenship from the list of global north countries, which is very interesting. And KHDA, which is from Dubai, they expect principal to have teaching qualification, at least 3 years experience, and advanced university degree.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. So can I just throw it open to the audience then, and to think about who are the providers in other contexts on the call. So if you would like to attempt to answer that question, can you please show your electronic hand so that I can identify you? No hands. I see any hands? Okay, Bernie, please, over to you.
Thank you. I had to raise my hand because I couldn't find it electronically, and it's so much easier just to go like that.
Old technology.
Tony, that's right. I was thinking about that question and thinking about the Australian context, and I guess my first response was, it's so messy in Australia because, and then I got thinking about the provider of what, because the provider of the guidelines about what leadership preparation and development should be, or the guidelines of what a successful and effective principal should be in our schools, comes from a national body, a national level that provides the standards, tells us what they should be doing, and so forth. And yet the provider of actually the programs of how we implement that comes from a variety of things, from universities where I teach and where we lead that, to professional organizations like the counterpart of BELMAS, which is ASOR. And in the case of religious schools, they have their own systems, or religious systems, which have their own groups. So I was thinking, how do we make sure that if the provision of the guidelines, if we like that it aligns and is coherent with the providers of the actual programs? I don't have the answer.
There are more questions than answers, that's for sure. Tina, I see your hand. Let us see you. There you
Hi
go.
there, folks.
Hi.
Saying hello from New Brunswick, Canada. It's early morning. Well, not early morning here, but morning time. And very happy to be here. In New Brunswick, we have sort of an eclectic mix of leadership availabilities for leaders. So to qualify for your principalship, it requires a master's degree, but also a principal certificate, which is attained after you've completed a leadership program that's offered by your regions. So here in New Brunswick, we have a dual system. We have an Anglophone and a Francophone system. So I'm speaking about the Anglophone system. And in the Anglophone system, there are 4 districts or regions. They offer a principal or a leadership certificate program that's required. That's that part of it. And then, of course, your master's degree along with that. But most recently, what's also been developed and I find quite interesting is a collaborative effort that includes the university, the Department of Education, our government, and also our professional organization, who have kind of come together and under the leadership of the professional organization have started to develop a program entitled NB Lead. And it's available to current leaders or aspiring leaders, but most in terms of funding and being able to be released from your duties to be able to attend sessions and workshops and whatnot, it's mainly focused on the principalship itself or the vice principalship. And some of the work that I'm doing with UMB with Dr. Lyle Ham is in the area of the vice principalship. And it's very interesting to see or to recognize the lack of provincial leadership in terms of preparing our vice principals for the next role and hearing about their struggles and trying to navigate and understand what their job truly is. So it'll be interesting to see how that particular program develops. At this point in time, it's not a requirement for leadership, and it's not readily available to those that are not already in the capacity of the role. But there's hope.
Right. Yes, thank you very much, Tina. And I think one of the challenges that we all face involved in this area of work is that when people talk about leadership preparation and development, they nearly always mean principal preparation and development rather than developing a wider range of leaders. And perhaps we'll have time to come back to that, perhaps we won't. Raj, I see your hand, and welcome to the Belmas RIG. A long time since you and I last met, but good to see you, or at least I can't see you at the moment. So please
okay. Yeah.
Join us and put on your camera.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. Good afternoon to all of you. I just want to add something. Ponzo has rightly mentioned that it is the universities who are the providers. But I thought what was going to be interesting to note is that government, Ministry of Education more specifically, subsidize school managers or school principals to take the course at no cost. In other words, bursaries are awarded to them. Yeah. So I thought this was important just to show that there's a very close relationship between the Ministry of Education and the service providers as well. So that is the situation I thought I should just mention. Thank you.
That's a really important point, Raj. Thank you very much. And it raises another question that we may not have time to discuss today, and that is the who pays question. Because you can see a situation where the education system benefits from having more highly qualified leaders, but of course there's also individual benefits, possibly in the ways of career development. So I do think that's an important issue, and the South African program is generously funded in that respect, Raj, as you rightly pointed out. So let's go on to another issue that I wanted to think about, and that is the issue of, so in relation to preparation, what is it that's provided? And I do take on board Ponzo's caution about not thinking just about training. I'm still absorbing that. And it does relate to your very good chapters in the book we edited, Ponzo, on leadership preparation in Africa. And I want to pick up, if I can, Sherry, your question on the chat about whether instructional leadership is just a local requirement, as in Malaysia, or whether it's more widely important. And I did research a very long time ago on that very question, when the National College for School Leadership was being set up, and we did a review of what was being provided in a range of different systems, and we found that instructional leadership was part of programs almost everywhere. Right, I think it's, and we mentioned the South African program earlier. Ponzo and Raj both done that. There it's called Managing Teaching and Learning, but it's not very different in its content from instructional leadership. And there's an interesting question around that and the way in which, by implication, the role of the principal is being identified with that issue of curriculum and teaching and learning. Let's think about so what is it that's provided? And Men, can I come to you first? What is the kind of content issues in relation to the programs you know about in the UAE?
and the content in terms of educational leadership development. So as colleagues have mentioned, we do have modules focusing on school improvement. That's the module I'm teaching, both at Edgbaston campus and also sometimes as a flying faculty to Dubai, is understanding school improvement and what makes schools perform better. So a large portion on instructional leadership and also on distributed leadership. We also have modules and content focusing on different leadership approaches and styles for colleagues to discuss what are the most applicable styles and approaches that they employ in their particular context because of different curricula they are using and different demands each type of private schools and public schools they have. So it's highly contextualized. Then we also have modules focusing on education policy. Again, this is a thing that needs to be localized and contextualized very much in terms of UAE context. If you are an international school, you are facing both the local education policies and also demands from, for example, the IB school as a chain and a franchise, what you have to respond to, and also the inspection requirements. So these are the key things we are working on. And a lot of things are focusing on the practice part. So we sometimes pair students from UAE with our part-time students here in Edgbaston. So they form kind of study buddies to exchange leadership experiences and practices between the two contexts.
Okay, thank you very much, Meng. Nia, where are you? Can't see you at the moment.
I'm here somewhere.
There you go. I can see you now. So what do you think about this issue of what is it that is provided for your...
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think it probably differs a lot in terms of, like, if I think about the different pieces that I was presenting, in terms of some of them are geared towards senior leaders, like some are geared towards experienced senior leaders, some are geared towards newly appointed senior leaders, middle leaders, and so on. So there's, depending on the different space of leadership that the program or the course or the CPD or whatever it is focusing on, of course, there's going to be different elements that are specifically looked at. But I suppose broadly speaking, what I really like about, and it's that model from the CSL Now Age of Leadership that I shared, that idea of it's the impact on the practice of the leader, but also the impact on the person of the leader, which I think is a really important thing that we're focusing on here in Ireland. There's the practice of it, but it's also the person as a leader. And I think in terms of that more shared and distributed form of leadership that we're working towards, that person of the leader and that identity around leadership is an important thing as well. Because of course, if we're looking at the distributed model, it's not necessarily just someone with the leadership title. So for a few reasons, I really like that piece.
Well, thank you very much. And I was struck in your presentation by, to some extent at least, an emphasis on traits-based criteria. I noticed the use of the word courage in your presentation, and that's an interesting issue around the extent to which traits-based development is still an appropriate way forward, because it focuses on the individual, or whether much more contextualized approaches and recognition of the individual needs of groups of people and not just principals might be of some interest. But thank you very much for that point. Ponso, what about South Africa on what's provided?
I'm very happy that Raj is here and Kelly Grant is here. Those are two colleagues of mine who are still very much on the ground, who would know what is being provided. But from my knowledge based on where I am, is that policy has been a significant focus of the provision in South Africa. And I remember years ago, Kelly Grant and myself were starting two postgraduate programs. One of them was a master's program in educational leadership and management and policy. I think that's what it was. It probably is still the same thing even now. And there was so much focus. The majority of our master students were school principals, and this was before the ACE on school leadership, and now the diploma in school leadership. But there was so much focus on policy knowledge, knowing for the leaders to know the policy. But I also happened to review the standards for school principalship, which lists key priorities in terms of what they call the core management skills or something like that. I can't remember. But there's a lot of focus on management of finances, management of human resources, and that kind of thing, and a whole generic other areas of focus too that shape the content of the different programs depending on who's offering them. But I'm very much willing to leave this space to either Kelly or Raj to give the most update response.
Before we go to that, I think it's important for us to make a distinction between those partly decentralized systems like South Africa, where principals and governing boards have a powerful involvement in managing human resource and finance. And there's many centralized systems where they have little control over most aspects of human resource. They're not involved in teacher selection, for example, and also have very small locally managed budgets. And I think that does have an influence on the content of programs to quite an extent. I wanted to pick up on the point that was made. I think two people have made this point now, Bernie and now you, Ponzo, about standards and the extent to which we think that a standards-based approach to curriculum provision, if we call it that, for school leaders is the extent to which that's valuable and helpful in scoping the expectations of government and others, or the extent to which it may simply atomize the role of the principal and under-recognize the holistic nature of leadership that we're facing. And just as an aside, and I don't know whether everybody on the call will know this already, but UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report this year is focusing on leadership, something I'm very pleased to see, because I think UNESCO and other major global organizations have neglected school leadership over many years, something I've mentioned whenever I have the opportunity to do so. And they've been kind enough, UNESCO, to ask me to be an expert reviewer in all this process, their language, not mine. And so one of the issues in reading drafts has been the ways in which they've emphasized standards quite a lot in the drafts. And one of my comments really has been, you should problematize it, and not simply assume it's automatically a good thing. Have these standards, especially if they're broken down into smaller and smaller units of activity, which, from my view, lends itself to a nice, very helpful tick box approach, beloved of political leaders who don't necessarily understand education very well. So anyway, that's me speaking out of turn on that. So colleagues, is anybody else on the call who'd like to contribute to this issue of what it is that's being provided in leadership preparation and development programs? Raj, is that no, that's not your hand. That's my cursor wandering inappropriately around the screen. Now,
okay, yeah, I
see your hand, Raj.
I could come in here, I think. Yeah, I think Ponzo.
We can't see you, Raj. Don't be so shy.
Oh, sorry.
There you are.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I think Ponzo has mentioned one of the critical issues around policy. We talk about the legal framework. Just to mention that there is now currently an Education Laws Amendment Act that is in process. Whether it's going to be approved by government is something that will be considered. So that's the one thing. But the issues here are managing teaching and learning, which is a very critical aspect of the curriculum. Managing people and change is the other. We talk about managing people and change. Then we have resource management, which emphasizes a lot on financial management. So that is important there as well. And then we have where we also introduced the issue around parent involvement. So we got a lot now in emphasizing parent involvement in education. But I must say something, that the South African Schools Act has made much differences in terms of giving lots of the powers and authorities to governing bodies. However, now with the new Education Laws Amendment Act, which is, it's a bill at the moment, which is going to then be passed as an act, is going to be taking away much of those powers from the governing bodies and taking it over back to the Ministry of Education. So in the main, the curriculum is about resource management, it's about policy, managing teaching and learning, and there's also the others, managing teaching and managing co-curricular and extracurricular activities. So those are minor modules that we teach in the program as well.
Thank you very much, Raj. I want to come to just the final area of discussion. We don't have a lot of time left, so which is what I call the impact. So the classic. So what difference does it make? We're all involved in leadership preparation and development activities in various parts of the world, and it's great to have such a diverse audience on this call, by the way. Thank you all for joining us. But what do we know about what difference it makes to have leadership preparation programs? Does it improve student learning, for example? Does it help more with teacher development? Does it lead to improved student welfare? All the things that matter to us. And so really the question is, what do we know about that, if anything? And Ponzo, if I may, to usurp your territory, report on some work I did and was published in 2012 with my colleague Derek Glover, where towards the later stages of our evaluation of the South African Principles Programme, we were able to carry out an impact analysis with the full cooperation of government, which gave us access to all the student school leaving certificate data. And obviously this was a very detailed study, both quantitative and qualitative, but what we found from the study as a headline was that any school that had as a principal someone who'd taken this advanced certificate in education school leadership program improved its school leaving certificate examination results twice as fast as those schools with no such participant. We feel that that's a very significant finding, suggesting that having taken this leadership preparation program in South Africa did lead to student outcomes improving. I'm not aware of much other research in other countries that's been able to tackle that issue. It's complex methodologically and required a substantial budget. But I'd be very interested in people's impressions of whether they have information on that or have other evidence of whether it works or not. So, Meng, what do you think?
So it's quite interesting because UAE context is how long you serve as a school leader in order to generate the impact that can be measured and compared. Because in the UAE, it's such a market-driven system. So they do look at school inspection results, for example, and test the scores, and government has certain targets for example, PISA, where UAE stands by certain years and teams, etc. But I don't hear many discussions surrounding, for example, leaders' impact on student and teacher well-being. They do have like the school plan for inclusivity, for special needs education students, etc. But I still feel that there's a very strong focus on measurable test scores as one of the key indicators to measure impact for leaders. And because they can use contract as a lever, to decide whether they continue the contract with the certain school leaders or not.
So that's high stakes.
Yes.
What you just suggested. And Niam, what do you think about that issue of impact?
Yeah, I think because of the fact that in the Irish context there isn't that compulsory qualification, there is, I suppose, a conversation about among the school leadership cohort, I suppose, that like before there was lots of these leadership preparation support development supports available, and that there was that real piece of kind of learning on the job, you know, and of course there is that element of experience and the value that that brings as well, but the feeling of lack of preparedness for it in those respects. But in terms of, I suppose, currently now, at least in my perspective or my understanding of the landscape, it's growing and developing. So at the moment, I don't know, is there anything as definitive as the study that, you know, you've described there, Tony? But it's something that I think we're building upon and building towards.
Thank you. Kelly, I can see your hand, and how nice to see you again, Kelly. It's been a long time.
Hi, Tony, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you. We can
yeah,
see you as well.
Great. I'm full of flu, so my apologies. Lovely to see you, Tony, and everyone else on video. Great to be here. Just 2 points, really. I don't think we've got anything more in terms of an impact model, but just really intuitive responses to the work we're doing. I think there are groups of people who are doing really good work, and in smaller settings, you can measure impact through a qualification where in a sort of district or something, you can see school levels going up. So, but I think going back to the ACE, school leadership, that you were involved with a number of years ago, and it's obviously built into the advanced diploma as well, is that whole idea of the cohort model. And where you had cohorts, where you had the selection, taking people from within a school and within a district and letting them work together, I think there lies the best opportunity for shared learning, growth, professional learning communities, networks, informal. And that's where you get issues like courage to apply change, because you can do it as a collective. So I think from the research we're doing, it's not quantitative at all, but it seems like that is a model that really works. And if I take that more, and it's not really from a leadership position, but in Makanda, where we live, it's a small community, very unequal. But again, the university is working directly, the whole university, with the school community across primary and high schools, trying to grow through the Vice Chancellor's initiative. And what we're seeing there is that the national, for example, the language, the English marks are improved from 19% in grade 4s nationally. In our thing, they're working at 40%. So there's a definite increase in marks in terms of literacy in the community. And I think it's working because there's a leadership aspect coming through with Principals Forum, qualifications, the university offering courses, plus there's maths interventions with NGOs, volunteers through the university. So the minute you have a whole school, whole district endeavor, that's where I think we're seeing the greatest impact. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Kelly. And Anna, I can see your hand, and this will have to be the last contribution from the floor. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Tony, and I'll be really brief. I just want to say, first of all, thank you, dear Niamh, for presenting a very positive picture of what's happening in Ireland. And we are very positive, and I think we're in a very good place. But I just want to make 2 very brief points. The first one is there is a real tension in any sort of leadership program continuously between the theory, the information that they need if you want the survivor's guide for principalship, and the development of the person of the leader. And I think we're working towards, we have the theory, we have the information, we haven't got towards the development of the person of the leader yet. And that's our work in Ireland currently. That's point number 1. Point number 2, again, very briefly, is that what I see is the juxtaposition of the principal, the standards, and their school community. And when we talk about the impact of standards on outcomes for students, for me, it's how the principal is ready, able, determined, I suppose prepared to deal being in that space between using or utilizing the standards correctly to impact on school culture, first of all, to build collaboration and distributed leadership, and then ultimately to move towards an impact on teaching, learning, and on student outcomes. And I think that positioning of the principal is something that we really need to think about a lot more. That's me. Thanks very much, Tony.
Thank you very much, Anna. And now I hand back to Suzanne and Bernie.
Thank you so much. This has been a really interesting session. I will share my screen. Oh, let's see if I can. Oh, you did it. Okay, you can do it.
I beat you to it.
It's great. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can do it. Do it for me. So first, thank you so much, Tony. I think you really captured relevant questions to discuss based on the different presentation in this session. And I'm so happy for all who have joined us for this event. And I love to see the ongoing conversation in the chat, and that we have had so many from different places around our globe. And thank you on behalf of Bernie, Deb, and myself. We want to thank the panel again for taking the time and contributing to this area of research and interest. So Mia, Meng, Ponce, and Tony, thank you so much for your contributions and to the insight to this important topic. I'm really impressed by your presentations, and I learned many things. Thank you for that. And then we want to take the opportunity to remind all our members that the next LPD RIG event will be at the Belmas conference in Glasgow on Friday, the 5th of July from 12 to 1:30. And we can share the information with you first that we have got a positive response from Professor Christopher Chapman, who will join us for a short talk. And of course, we will continue to discuss things together. We will have the opportunity to discuss and plan further activities together at this next event in Glasgow. You are all very welcome. And we have planned one upcoming event for the autumn. We will focus on leading in crisis connected to leadership preparation and development. So if you're interested in sharing something from your context, please get in touch with me, Bernie, or Deb. If you have any other suggestions for other speakers, please get in touch. We will get back to you shortly with the time and date, but more perhaps September if everything goes smoothly. And we're also planning a second event later in the autumn, and we are really much looking forward to hearing from you if you have any ideas on what we could talk about that time. And last but not least, the last slide. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. Without you, we wouldn't be anything. So you're the most important persons. So please get in touch if you want to. And Bernie, I will remember to say, please follow us on X nowadays, earlier Twitter. Thank you so much. Looking forward to see you this summer or in other places around the world. Thank you again. Have a really
Thank you so much for coming.
Week.
Thank you very
for
much.
coming.
Thanks a million, everyone.
Yeah,
Take care.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet
Thanks
you
for
all.
showing up.
Bye.
Susan, can I just